Now coming close to the close of our 23rd year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1234, with a release and air date of Saturday, October 22nd, 2022. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. It is time to take another look at the latest happenings in the world of amateur radio and the wider world of communications. Now coming close to the close of our 23rd year of service to the amateur radio community all around the world, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1234 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Amateur radio operators all around the world are invited to participate in a week-long scientific experiment as the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, will be conducting their largest experiment and research campaign in years. The 2022 ARRL online auction to benefit various ARRL programs is now underway. We will tell you how you can participate. Amateur Radio Club members in Ohio help out local law enforcement. The International Telecommunications Union announces the location of World Radio Conference 2023. FastScan high-definition amateur television will soon be returning to the International Space Station. A special event station is coming up to honor the SS Edmund Fitzgerald tragedy. Nikola Tesla's original laboratory in Wardenclyffe, Long Island is getting a major upgrade. The Arecibo Observatory will be transformed into a center for STEM education. The FCC adopts new regulations that require unused satellites to be deorbited within 5 years. And the design of QSL cards and their wide range of typography are showcased in a new book. We will tell you all about it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Our technology reporter, Leo Laporte, W6TWT, will talk about artificial intelligence, and he will tell us what is currently passing for AI on the internet is not really AI. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, will tell us why he is currently settling a little personal challenge. Our own amateur radio historian, Bill Continelli, W2XOI, returns with another edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives. This week, Bill talks about amateurs during World War I. Then once back home, how they had to muster to save the amateur bands from being occupied permanently by the military and finally get back on the air. And our tower climbing and antenna master, Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, will cover his tower and antenna short topics list. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in sunny Albany, New York this week, I'm George W2XBS.
And reporting this week from my ham shack in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our amateur radio station high atop the western Catskill Mountains of New York State, where the autumn is leaving but the leaves are still here, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where our new hobby is raking, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where summer, autumn, and old man winter have been having one big old party, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now with our lead story, here is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Leading off our news this week, The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, will be conducting their largest experiment and research campaign from October 19th through the 28th, 2022. Amateur radio operators are invited to listen and participate. The research will last for 10 days and include 13 experiments, with transmissions taking place between 1400 to 0600 UTC daily. The transmission experiments include moon mounts, Jupiter bounce, HF ocean scatter, and ionosphere satellite interactions. Amateur radio operators are being asked to monitor the times of the transmissions and signal quality. Reports can be filed electronically, and a special QSL card will be sent for participation. This will be the most scientifically diverse campaign ever conducted at HAARP. Particularly notable experiments include a first-of-its-kind attempt to bounce a signal off of Jupiter, investigation into possible causes of the airglow phenomenon known as STEVE, or Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancement, and testing the feasibility of using radio transmissions to measure the interiors of near-Earth asteroids. The October research campaign is our largest and most diverse to date, with researchers and citizen scientists collaborating from across the globe, said HAARP Program Manager Jessica Matthews. The number of experiments is the highest so far under the 5-year, $9.3 million grant awarded last year by the National Science Foundation to establish the Subaurora Geophysical Observatory at HAARP. The observatory's purpose is to explore the Earth's upper atmosphere and geospace environment. The Jupiter experiment will send a signal to Jupiter and bounce it off the giant planet's ionosphere, with the hope that it will be received at a receipt facility in New Mexico. Jupiter is currently about 374 million miles from Earth. The experiment will stretch the transmitting ability of HAARP, which can produce up to 3.6 megawatts of power, to its fullest. It will also test the receiving ability of the New Mexico site, which consists of 512 antennas. HAARP is requesting that amateur radio operators remain quiet on October 24th from 0700 to 0800 UTC as they attempt the largest active remote sensing operation in history. Due to the distance involved, it is important that the noise floor is kept as low as possible in the 2.7 to 10 megahertz range for the duration of the experiment. The Air Force originally developed and owned HAARP, but transferred the research instrument to the University of Alaska at Fairbanks in August 2015. UAF operates the site under an agreement with the U.S. Air Force. Pilots flying in the Gulkana area are asked to check with the Federal Aviation Administration for temporary flight restriction details. An overview of all the experiments can be found at the HAARP website. Participating amateur radio operators can request a QSL card and send reception reports to HAARP at P.O. Box 271, Gakona, Alaska 99586. HAARP is a scientific endeavor aimed at studying the properties and behavior of the ionosphere. After its transfer to the University of Alaska in 2015, that allowed HAARP to continue with exploration of ionospheric phenomenon via a land-use cooperative research and development agreement with the U.S. Air Force. HAARP is the world's most capable high-power, high-frequency transmitter for study of the ionosphere.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The 17th annual ARRL online auction preview is now open. Bidding began at 10 a.m. EDT on Friday, October 21st, and runs through 10 p.m. on Thursday, October 27th. RT Systems Incorporated is sponsoring this year's ARRL online auction, which benefits ARRL education and technology initiatives and programs. With more details on this year's auction, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
The 2022 auction includes a large assortment of ham radio gear that was previously tested by the ARRL lab for the regular product review column that runs in QST magazine. You can visit the auction website, register to bid, and check out details on the items available so you can be ready to place a bid on your favorites. Also, keep an eye on the ARRL Facebook page and Instagram for featured products and auction highlights throughout the event. Registration, though, is not necessary to browse the items for sale, and you can register at any time during the auction. ARRL's annual online auction is an important fundraiser and critical means of support for ARRL educational programming. Auction proceeds ensure the continuation of programs that support the licensing of new hams, as well as amateur radio emergency service training and enhancements to technical and operating education for all ARRL members and the greater amateur radio community. And if you don't want to bid but still want to contribute to the ARRL Education and Technology Fund, visit www.arrl.org/donate. For more information about the ARRL online auction, contact Lisa Tardet. She is KB1MOI. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
A few of the products up for bid this year that were reviewed by the ARRL lab include an Elecraft K4D HF 6-meter SDR transceiver, a RF kit RF2K solid-state linear amplifier, a Yaesu FTDX 10 MF-HF and 6-meter transceiver, and an EmComm ID52A dual-band FM digital handheld transceiver. Prospective bidders must register and create an account. Your www.arrl.org user ID and password will not work on the auction site. Registration is a one-time action. If you have previously registered for the ARRL online auction, you can use the same username and password to sign in to this year's auction. If you have forgotten your username or password, click on the Help tab on the ARRL online auction website for assistance. It's not necessary to register to browse the items for sale, and you can register anytime during the auction on the ARRL online auction website.
The Wayne Amateur Radio Club manned a 30-foot-tall mobile observational infrastructure protection unit, or Skywatch Tower, at Ohio's Wayne County Fair in September again this year. With more details on this unique amateur radio event and how amateurs assisted in the fair operations and security, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, for this special report.
Staffed by specially trained amateur radio volunteers, that tower provided 24-hour surveillance, monitoring, and a record of activity on the fairgrounds that included medical emergencies, lost children, and other situations where help may have been needed. Captain Doug Hunter, KE8JNH of the Wayne County Sheriff's Office, was impressed with its performance. Last year, I put in a request for the tower from the Ohio Department of Homeland Security, Hunter said, and after seeing the benefit of having it, I immediately requested the unit again for this year's fair. Positioned near the grandstand, that tower gave volunteers a bird's-eye view of the midway that allows one person to see from the air what 4 or 5 people can see from the ground. The observation deck is equipped with state-of-the-art video equipment and provides situational awareness in places where there are large crowds in attendance. Eric Mass, W8ELM, said the club memberships who have additional training, apart from their amateur radio licensing exams, take shifts monitoring the crowd. Through our training, we understand how to communicate with law enforcement, said Mass. We know what they need to hear. If we see a situation that needs their attention, our radio is connected directly to their dispatch inside their command center on the fairgrounds. And once we report it, we are out of the loop, and law enforcement manages everything from that point on. Captain Hunter added that as long as this is available to us, we will take advantage of it. If we can utilize something that increases the safety of fairgoers, we will take advantage of that. WARC members donated more than 60 hours of their time, and we are very thankful for that. Also, thanks to Dan Starcher, Public Communications Specialist for the Wayne County Commissioner's Office in Worcester, Ohio, for information contained in today's story. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
With an array of pan, tilt, and zoom cameras, the tower unit provides a 360-degree view of the fair's most vulnerable areas. It's climate-controlled and is capable of being self-powered to ensure continuous operation.
The International Telecommunication Union has announced that the 2023 World Radio Communication Conference will be held on November 20th through December 15th, 2023 in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. World Radio conferences are held every 3 to 4 years, at which time delegates from around the world review and, as needed, revise the International Telecommunications Union radio regulations, which provide an international framework for regulation of the RF spectrum and the orbits of communication satellites. The radio regulations include the basic structure of the amateur radio service, including frequency allocations and license requirements. The ARRL and International Amateur Radio Union are always involved in pre-conference deliberations and send observers to the conferences.
For over 3 years, the EmComm training organization has been training amateur radio operators to be skilled with the use of digital WinLink communications. This effort stemmed from the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, which devastated Puerto Rico in 2017, and the subsequent call for competent WinLink operators. To develop proficiency, weekly WinLink Thursday exercises have been practiced by more than 800 international operators. The upcoming November 12, 2022 semi-annual drill is open to all participants who have or would like to build skills for digital radio messaging, such as sending attached forms or photos, essential for emergency communications for any served agency, whether local government, FEMA, or any NGO, including the Amateur Radio Emergency Service Groups and the Radio Operators of Canada Auxiliary Communications Service. The ETO believes this common pathway approach to communications fosters the interoperability that is essential for responding to a national or regional disaster. The organization recognizes the varied levels of skill with WinLink. Thus, simple and introductory tasks have been designed with a progression to more complicated messaging, ranging from use of Telnet to VHF gateway messaging, and finally to national peer-to-peer digital communication on high-frequency bands without the use of the Internet infrastructure. International as well as domestic participants are welcomed to join by visiting the ETO website. More than 2,000 participants are expected. The scenario is an area-wide natural disaster affecting most communities in North America. The next few weeks of WinLink Thursday exercises will be opportune for those who wish to participate in the larger semi-annual drill. It is anticipated that all participants will be mapped if the tasks are completed appropriately, and an honor roll of competent participants be published on the website for those who wish to deploy and become operational. FEMA has published the updated EOC How to Quick Reference Guide, a collection of best practices that will contribute to developing an EOC that can successfully meet the jurisdiction's needs and will cover topics such as hazard vulnerability assessments, physical site selection, mitigation, considerations, EOC capabilities and requirements, information management systems, and training and exercises. The updates include considerations for virtual and hybrid working environments.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
During the recent AMSAT UK Space Colloquium held on October 8th, AMSAT announced that the fast scan ham television unit for the ISS is repaired and on the way to Houston for testing. The flight date is dependent on testing. Ham TV has been inoperative since April 2018. It had been active since April 2014, having been launched to the ISS in 2013. It was returned to Earth for diagnosis and repair in late 2018. The ARRIS ham TV transmitter is capable of downlinking DVB-S digital video of ARRIS contacts and other activities on board the ISS to amateur ground stations in the 2.3 GHz amateur band.
The huge dish at the Arecibo Observatory was destroyed by the telescope's collapse in 2020. The National Science Foundation has decided not to rebuild the iconic radio telescope at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, instead winding down current scientific projects there and converting the facility to an educational center to serve as a hub for STEM education and outreach. In an announcement in mid-October, the National Science Foundation said it was soliciting proposals to manage the education, research, and outreach elements of the new center. The announcement also specified that the solicitation does not include rebuilding the 305-meter telescope or operational support for current scientific infrastructure, such as the 12-meter radio telescope or LIDAR facility. According to Angel Vasquez, WP3R, the head of the telescope's operation at Arecibo, all current scientific work at the facility will end on September 30th, 2023.
Here is an update to a story we brought to you last week concerning the Internet Archive's development of a new amateur radio database. The Internet Archive has begun gathering materials for its new digital library of amateur radio and communications. So if you want to be part of this historic project, here's your chance. The Internet Archive is asking ham radio operators to look in their collections of printed and digital materials, as well as any personal materials for inclusion in a digital library providing a window into the history of the amateur radio community. The library is especially interested in collecting material that documents contributions by any groups who historically may have been marginalized in the ham community, such as women and people of color. A recent grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications is underwriting the development of the library, which will give open access to educators, students, researchers, and members of the public. The library will be a free online resource that combines archived digitized print materials, born digital content, websites, oral histories, personal collections, and other related records and publications. The goals of the DLARC are to document the history of amateur radio and to provide freely available educational resources for researchers, students, and the general public. The project development team is looking for podcasts, print materials, such as newsletters, pamphlets, and journals, which will be digitized for easier access. To enrich the collection further, developers of the library are hoping to conduct oral histories of influential individuals active in amateur radio. If you think you have materials that could be useful for the library, email Kay Savitz, K6KJN, the Program Manager of Special Collections. Writing on the Internet Archive blog, Kay noted that they are especially interested in obscure materials, including locally produced ham radio newsletters and small magazines. Kay can be reached at kay.archive.org. That's kay.archive.org.
The ARRL Foundation is now accepting applications for grants to amateur radio organizations for its 2023 scholarship program. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more details on the program in this report filed from League headquarters.
The grants program awards limited funding to organizations for eligible amateur radio-related projects and initiatives, particularly those where they focus on educating, licensing, and supporting amateur radio activities. Youth-based projects and initiatives are especially encouraged. The ARRL Foundation Grants Program accepts proposals in a cyclical model 3 times a year in February, June, and October. Proposals for the October grant period are being accepted now through October 31st. Awardees will be notified approximately 1 month after the closing of each cycle. And the ARRL Foundation Scholarship Program will award more than 100 scholarships to deserving radio amateurs pursuing higher education. Individual scholarships range from $500 to $25,000. And all applicants must be an active FCC licensed amateur radio operator and submit a completed online application by noon on January 4th, 2023. Active foreign amateur radio operators are eligible for the Amateur Radio Digital Communication Scholarships. The ARRL Foundation Scholarship Committee will review all applicants for eligibility and award decisions. Scholarship recipients will be notified in May of 2023 via USPS and email, and awards are mailed directly to recipient schools. Additional information and a link to the application process can be found at www.arrl/scholarship-program. I'm John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
For the 2023 scholarships, the ARRL Foundation will be utilizing the same scholarship management platform that was used for the 2022 scholarships. Transcripts and additional requirements must be submitted with the application and are not emailed separately. A number of scholarships required additional documents, such as a letter of recommendation from a sitting officer of an ARRL-affiliated club. Applications without accompanying transcripts and additional required documents, if applicable, will not be considered. The ARRL Foundation administers programs to support the amateur radio community and was established in 1973 by ARRL. Once again, the link for the Foundation Scholarship is www.arrl.org/scholarship-program.
The Central States VHF Society, the oldest group in the country devoted to weak signal VHF, held their 54th annual conference on July 21st through the 23rd, 2022.
Over 130 amateurs attended the event, which was held in La Crosse, Wisconsin. This year's conference highlighted the recent activity with 222 MHz worked all states, as well as the Fred Fish Memorial Award, the VHF Spring Sprints, and the year-long competition, states above 50 MHz. The Wilson Award recognizes service to the Society, or VHF in general, and was presented to Peter Van Horn, KA6U. For the past 2 summers, Van Horn has been traveling the country, activating states via EME on 144, 222, 432, and 1296 MHz. His efforts resulted in 6 stations completing the worked all states on 222 MHz in just the past year. The John T. Chambers Award for Technical Achievement was presented to Dave Oline, K1WH6, for his many years at Directive Systems and Engineering in Virginia. Oline has been active in the chase for 222 MHz worked all states and has been instrumental in promoting 222 activity on the band. I'm John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
222 MHz WAS Award recipients in attendance for the award presentation were Charlie Betts, N0AKC, Dave Curl, N9HF, Joel Harrison, W5ZN, John Swinarski, K1OR, Ed Gray, WOSD, Mark Thorson, WB0TEM, Dave Oline, K1WHS, and Marshall Williams, K5QE. The Fred Fish Memorial Award recipients attending the conference were Ralph Smith, W4UDH, Jim Spence, KO9A, John Feltz, W9JN, and Greg Clausen, W0LGQ. More information about the Central States VHF Society is available on their website at www.csvhfs.org.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
And now with the latest technology news and commentary from Petaluma, California. This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to present Leo Laporte.
Welcome. Good to see you. You know, this isn't like, a TV show where it's, episode 36 from season 19. Actually, it could be, couldn't it? Come to think of it. Well, season 19 starts next year. This is Actually, I should do some math. I don't know. If we did seasons, this would be our 18th season. 18 years as the tech guy. Boy, have things changed. One of the big changes, artificial intelligence. We talk about that a lot. A lot of times when companies say, we're using AI, that's just a marketing term in their eyes. It's not really artificial intelligence. But there are things, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a definition. Because computers, what computers are is just very fast calculators. But they're so fast that what they do can appear to be thinking, to be magical. It isn't in most cases. It's definitely not magical, and it's not really thinking either. In most cases, what a computer is doing is following logic, rules given to it by a human or humans, the program. And it can, it's on rails. It can only go in, those directions that the human wrote. That's traditional computers, and almost everything you do runs that way. From Microsoft Office to you're making a phone call, that's using just rules, logic defined by humans that the machine follows. Very fast calculator. But there is something called artificial intelligence, or machine learning sometimes. And the way machine learning distinguishes itself from this old school kind of thing is it uses real world data as training sets. It absorbs it, it digests it, and internally makes its own rules up. No human makes up the rules. The computer makes up the rules. It digests all this information and says, well, I notice this happens every time that happens, so this must be the case, so this is the new rule. With artificial intelligence or machine learning is that process, right? Absorbing, digesting this information. With artificial intelligence, humans make rules, but they don't write programs. They just say, look, this is your goal. So, for instance, AlphaGo, which is the smartest chess-playing computer out there. It's actually the smartest game-playing computer out there. It was designed to learn how to play the game by giving the rules of the game and a goal. Take the king, and then it played billions of games against itself. It just real fast, because it does it real fast, doesn't have to, there's no human involvement, and was able in 4 hours to play so many games that it started to see the rules, make up its own program. That's really the key. It wrote its own program and became better than any human. And it did that not just with chess, but it did it with an even harder game called Go, and has beat humans, the best human players at Go. So when a car, for instance, is self-driving, which is, by the way, I'm going to put that in air quotes, when it's doing what it does, it's doing it based on training from a whole bunch of sets of information, right? The most interesting example of this right now is this, and maybe you've seen it already, this art generated by artificial intelligence. I hate the phrase artificial intelligence. There's no intelligence. It's artificial, yes, but it's not intelligent like we think of intelligent at all. It's just, but programs like DALL-E 2, which was created by OpenAI, which is a kind of a nonprofit artificial intelligence research organization funded by a bunch of companies, including Elon Musk. OpenAI is DALL-E 2. Then there's an open source one that's actually is much more interesting to me, called Stable Diffusion. You can run it yourself if you have enough horsepower. Stable Diffusion is a good example because it's open source. We know how it's been set up. It's been trained on images on the internet. Millions of images. It just goes out and scrapes these images from everywhere, from Pinterest, from Getty. We even know Getty, which is the big, stock photo site. A lot of times you'll see in the newspaper, in a magazine, on a website, Getty Images. They license an image, famous images, many of them. We know that Getty Images even has been scraped because they put them publicly on the internet, but they put them with a big watermark. You say Getty Images, and you have to buy it if you want to get rid of the watermark. We know that Stable Diffusion has used those images because many of the images come back with a big kind of what looks like a Getty Images watermark across it. That's what it learned. Okay. And there are artists, Greg Rutkowski's one, who says, it's learned on all my art, looked at my website, and now you can say to Stable Diffusion, paint a picture of the Queen of Monrovia as drawn by Greg Rutkowski, and that can be a description. So it's very interesting. Up until recently, you had to apply. There was a waiting list to use DALL-E 2 from OpenAI. Now the waiting list is over. Anybody can apply. And even more, Microsoft, this week, among all of its announcements, announced its new Surface notebooks and so forth. It announced it's investing in DALL-E 2 and bringing it to the new Microsoft Designer app, which is, their version of Figma, which just got sold to Adobe for $20 billion. It's going to be part of that. So you can be doing your Microsoft Designer, which you would do to design, I don't know, birthday party invitations or company brochures. And now you can use DALL-E 2. You can say, what I need here is an image of Leonardo DiCaprio sailing to Spain in the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And then it will make this image. Actually, make many of them. You kind of can refine it and get it closer to what you want and then use it. That'll be part of Designer. But even more, in Bing and Microsoft Edge, in Bing Search, there's an image creator tool, and you'll be able to use DALL-E 2. See, to me, this is a very interesting, I think, step forward in artificial intelligence. Here is a thing. Don't get scared. It's not, it's not the Terminator. It's not Whopper. It's not Skynet. It's just a bunch of big computers in the sky that, given text prompts, can generate images. And it is, I'm going to say machine learning. I mean, it is, I guess, AI, an example of AI. No intelligence, but it's just got so many images. And it's very important that those images had words associated, right? So what happened is the computer just said, okay, I have this image. I don't know what it is. The computer doesn't know what it is. But they're words, and it goes, well, these words must go to this image. So, okay, keep that in mind. That's what's interesting. It's what happened with AlphaGo. It's what happened with Stable Diffusion, with OpenAI's DALL-E 2, is you get enough of these. There's some critical mass, some massive number, millions, billions of these images, and suddenly it can make inferences like a human would be. We infer that since every day, every morning in our whole lives, the sun has come up in the east, that's what's going to happen tomorrow morning. That's an inductive proof, an inference, because we don't know, but based on past experience. So that's all it's doing. It's inferring. It's an inference engine. I think inference engine would be so much better than artificial intelligence, because that's a scary thing. This thing isn't going to take over the world. It might take over art, though. Wow. Pretty incredible what it's doing. And these images are sort of uncanny and sometimes disturbing and a little weird. So just, if you hear the term, that's what it is. It's not intelligence. It's machine learning. It's learned how to infer stuff and to put two and two together. And they're getting better at it. I think, despite the hundreds of billions of dollars spent now on teaching cars to drive, they're not very good at it. You know why? Humans. We're so unpredictable. Anyway, I'm glad you were here, and I'm here, and I'll be here next week, and I hope you'll come by and bring your friends too as we talk high tech. Leo Laporte, the tech guy.
Are you ready for another excursion into amateur radio history? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another installment of the Ancient Amateur Archives.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
By the time World War I ended in November 1918, almost 5,000 amateurs had served in uniform, with many giving their lives overseas. Amateurs had proven themselves to be invaluable to the war effort. The Army and Navy were faced with an absolute lack of trained radio officers, instructors, operators, and even state-of-the-art equipment. Amateurs stepped in and provided the knowledge, men, and sometimes even the equipment necessary to help win the war. An interesting example of this was the case of Alessandro Fabri, a wealthy yachtsman and radio amateur who had top-notch stations on both his yacht and on Mount Desert Island, Maine. The Navy commandeered the stations, and the yacht, made Fabri an ensign, and placed him in command. Largely with his own money, he expanded his operation and improved his equipment. Fabri's station was used to pass most of the official communications between the battlefronts in Europe and Washington. The traffic often mounted to 20,000 words a day, most of them in cipher. Captain, later Major, Edwin Armstrong, whose regenerative receiver was being used worldwide, was in charge of the Signal Corps' radio laboratory in Paris, where he developed the superheterodyne receiver. Thousands of amateurs served as Navy radio men and Signal Corps operators. It would seem from this information that amateurs had conclusively proven their worth and that the Navy would return the amateurs' frequencies back to them once the war had ended. Sadly, this was not the case. A string of events conspired against the amateur and almost eliminated all privately owned stations. The villain in this play was the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, a puritanical landlubber and teetotaler whose opinions often got him into trouble. He was the type of individual that H.L. Mencken and Sinclair Lewis satirized as one who is terrified that somewhere someone is having fun. For years, he had demanded that the Navy have exclusive control over the radio spectrum. Now it appeared he had his chance. The effects of the first modern global war, along with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, had temporarily turned the country extremely conservative. It was in this mindset that the Espionage Act of 1918 and Prohibition were passed. Hundreds of suspected communists and anarchists were deported in the Red Scare. Even the great socialist Eugene V. Debs was imprisoned for disagreeing with the government. Seizing the opportunity, Secretary Daniels urged the passage of legislation giving the Navy a monopoly on radio communications. As a result, the Poindexter Bill was introduced in the Senate and the Alexander Bill in the House. Political observers gave both bills an excellent chance of passing. Back at the ARRL, things looked bleak. All memberships had lapsed, along with all amateur licenses. 80% of the amateurs were still overseas. QST had ceased publication. The unpaid printing bill was now $4,700, and there was just $33 in the Treasury. However, action was needed immediately to defeat these bills. Hiram Percy Maxim and the other board members dug into their own personal funds and sent out a blue card appeal to all known amateurs or their families, asking them to write their congressmen and urge the defeat of the bills. It worked. Thousands of letters poured into Washington from amateurs or, more often than not, their family members asking that amateur radio be saved. Congressmen who opposed a military monopoly of the airwaves also joined in, lending their support to amateur radio. Overwhelmed by this grassroots opposition to naval control of the radio spectrum, Congress killed the bills in committee. This 1919 letter-writing campaign had a profound historical impact on all of radio, for, had these bills passed, not only would amateur radio have disappeared forever, but all private communication activities, including broadcasting, business radio, citizens band, GMRS, cellular, etc., either never would have evolved or would have been delayed by years or even decades. With the bills defeated, Maxim and the ARRL Board of Directors issued $7,500 worth of bonds to league members to get QST going again. At the same time, pressure was brought on Washington to lift the radio ban and allow amateurs back on the air. Partial success was achieved on April 12, 1919, when the Navy removed the ban on receiving, but not transmitting. Thousands of amateurs and other listeners removed the seals from their receivers, which had been placed there by a government radio inspector, strung up their antennas, and warmed their filaments with the sounds of the government stations. But they wanted more. Their fingers fondled their telegraph keys as they waited for the lifting of the transmitting ban. Finally, in November 1919, after a joint resolution had been introduced in Congress demanding that the Secretary of the Navy remove restrictions on amateur radio, the transmitting ban was lifted, licenses were reissued, and amateurs were back on the air. Now began the Second War, Spark versus CW. Remember that amateurs were allowed in effect just one frequency, 200 meters. A Spark station on 200 meters actually generated a signal from 150 to 250 meters. With the sensitive regenerative receivers now in use, the practical range was several hundred miles. Transcontinental relays now took less than 5 minutes. The number of licensed amateur operators stood at 5,719 in 1920, 10,809 in 1921, and 14,179 in 1922, and all were operating on 200 meters. To quote Arthur Lyle Budlong in The Story of the American Radio Relay League, "It was interference. Lord, what interference! It was bedlam." Something had to be done. And it was. Various transatlantic tests were conducted from 1921 through 1923. The results overwhelmingly showed CW was far superior to Spark. Post-war vacuum tube production was at its peak. In 1921, an RCA 5-watt tube cost $8, and as a single-tube CW transmitter could outperform a 500-watt Spark station. A 50-watt tube cost $30 and was 5 times more effective than the best 1-kilowatt Spark station. Since CW took only a fraction of the bandwidth that Spark did, over 50 CW stations in the same area could occupy the 150 to 200 meter range versus one Spark station. The transatlantic tests also revealed some other interesting facts. Due to the excessive interference on 200 meters, some stations had dropped down to 100 meters where, to their surprise, they found conditions much better. Throughout the 1922 through 1924 period, hundreds of tests and casual contacts were made on the 100-meter wavelength, which conclusively showed not only CW's superiority over Spark, but increased range on the shorter wavelengths. Once again, the scientists came forward and said that long distances on 100 meters were mathematically impossible. And once again, the amateurs proved them wrong. During 1924, several CW contacts were made at distances exceeding 6,000 miles. On October 19, 1924, a station in England worked New Zealand, a distance of almost 12,000 miles. Amateur communications had now reached halfway around the world. Although it would take a few years to discover the role that the ionosphere had played in shortwave communications, there is no doubt that amateurs pioneered the use of shortwave. The phenomenal success of CW convinced the vast majority of amateurs to buy that vacuum tube. A few still clung to their Spark sets, screaming "Spark forever!" But by 1924, Spark was almost extinct. The 150 to 200 meter region was now orderly, filled with thousands of CW stations living in peaceful coexistence with each other and the occasional Spark renegade. Legally, however, amateurs could not go below 150 meters. True, many were already on 100 meters without a problem, but amateurs wanted a slice of the shortwave spectrum allocated to them. After all, it was amateurs who had discovered the shortwaves. Now, with worldwide interest being shown there, they wanted protection. Negotiations were ongoing with the Department of Commerce to give the amateurs specific frequencies. On July 24, 1924, the Department of Commerce authorized new amateur frequency bands. They were 150 to 200 meters, or 1,500 to 2,000 kilocycles, 75 to 80 meters, or 3,500 to 4,000 kilocycles, 40 to 43 meters, or 7,000 to 7,500 kilocycles, 20 to 22 meters, or 13,600 to 15,000 kilocycles, and 4 to 5 meters, or 60,000 to 75,000 kilocycles. Except for a portion of the 150 to 200 meter band, Spark was prohibited. Spark would survive in the hands of a few rebels until 1927, when it was banned altogether. CW was here to stay. By January 1925, the 80, 40, and 20 meter bands were filling up with amateurs drawn by the promise of transcontinental daylight DX. Next time, we will check out an amateur with a call of 8XK and his activities on the night of November 2nd, 1920. In the meantime, take a sip of that Prohibition bootleg gin, check out those new shortwave bands, and join us the next time for the Ancient Amateur Archives.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a podcast at our website, www.twiar.net, and streamed worldwide via Spotify and iHeartMedia.
Here's this week's AMSAT news from Bruce Page, KK5DO. We've given some tips and how-to for working the FM satellites and the linear satellites, but did you know that besides using APRS on some of the satellites, there is a group that's doing WSJT-X? Well, they're using the linear satellite, 5 kilohertz from the bottom of the downlink and passband. There's also a group on Facebook that uses FT4 on satellites. This should make for a lot of fun for many of those that are digitally inclined. When working HF, you have many different modes, voice, of course, CW, slow scan TV, and ready, as well as the digital ones. Now you have almost the same ability on the satellites. If you have only worked satellites during that time using voice, give the digital modes a try. There's something there for everyone on HF as well as on satellite.
It is time for the weekly propagation forecast report, brought to us each week by Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington, who reports that sunspot activity took quite a plunge over this reporting week, October 13th through the 19th. The average daily sunspot numbers declined from 114.9 to 57.3, while the equivalent solar flux values went from 155.3 to 119.6. Geomagnetic indicators were slightly lower, with the average planetary A index going from 13.3 to 10.6, and the middle latitude A index went from 10.4 to 8.1. A new sunspot group emerged on the very busy sun surface on October 13th, 2 more on October 15th, another on October 16th, 1 more on the 17th, another one on October 19th, and 1 more on October 20th. The Wednesday forecast of solar flux shows a peak of 160 during the first week in November. So let's take a look at the predicted daily flux values, which are 115 on October 21st and 22nd, 120 on October 23rd all the way through the 27th, 130 on October 28th, 155 on October 29th and 30th, 152 on October 31st, and 160 on November 1st through the 8th. Taking a look now at the predicted planetary A index, it will be 5 on October 21st through the 23rd, 12 on October 24th, 15 on October 25th and 26th, and then 12, 15, 12, and 20 on October 27th through the 30th, 15 on October 31st through November 1st, then 18, 15, 12, 20, and 8 on November 2nd through the 6th, and 5 on November 7th through the 9th. Despite the lower solar activity, worldwide 10-meter propagation has been very good this past week, probably helped by seasonal variations as we head deeper into the fall season.
Radio Sport contesting this week, some good opportunities. October 20th, it's the NTC QSO party, that's CW. October 21st to the 23rd, the VU Telephone Pioneers QSO party, that's CW phone and digital. October 22nd through the 23rd as well, the YBD XPI FT8 contest, FT8 there. October 22nd and 23rd, the UKEI DX contest, SSB, single sideband and phone. October 22nd through the 24th, the YLRL DXNAYL anniversary contest, that's CW phone and digital. 22nd and the 23rd, the Stu Perry Top Band Challenge, that's CW. October 23rd also, the North American Single Sideband Sprint Contest, that's phone. October 23rd through the 26th, the Classic Exchange, CW. And on October 26th, the SKCC Sprint, that's CW. Also October 26th, the UKEICC 80-meter contest, that's CW as well. And some upcoming section, state, and division conventions to be aware of this week. On October 29th, the Copa Fest, hosting the ARRL Arizona State Convention, that's in Maricopa, Arizona. November 5th and 6th, the Stone Mountain Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Georgia Section Convention, that's in Lawrenceville, Georgia. November 12th, the Montgomery ARC Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Alabama State Convention, that's in Montgomery, Alabama. And on November 12th, it's the Rock Hill Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL South Carolina Section Convention, that's in Rock Hill, South Carolina.
The Dayton Hamvention has announced that the Ramada Inn in Xenia, Ohio, is closing. The Dayton Daily News is reporting that the city of Xenia will take full possession of the Ramada Inn on November 1st, 2022. The land will be incorporated into the Xenia Town Square Revitalization Project. Hamvention, the largest annual ham radio convention in the United States, will be held May 19th through the 21st, 2023, at the Greene County Fairgrounds and Expo Center in Xenia. A list of other accommodations can be found on the Hamvention website at hamvention.org/travel-parking/accommodations.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. A week ago, I unexpectedly had my gallbladder removed. As emergencies go, I was lucky to be in a major metropolitan area with a remarkable hospital supported by a group of humanity whom I've never much interacted with in my life. The staff at Sir Charles Gardner Hospital were, without exception, amazing. From the orderlies to the nurses and everyone behind those, I interacted with about 50 people directly during my stay, and every single person had a smile to share and an encouraging word to give. As life experiences go, it was as uplifting as I've ever had the opportunity to celebrate. Sure, it hurt like hell and there were things I'd rather not have to try again, but on the whole it was, if not pleasant, at least memorable. Recovery is going to take a little while, and I understand my voice is expected to return to normal in a few weeks, having been intubated for most of a day. Half an hour after being discharged from my 5 days in hospital, I was faced with a choice: produce nothing for my weekly contribution to our hobby and face the risk of an astronomical bill from my hosting provider, because the script that I wrote didn't foresee that there might be a time when I was unable to provide content, or produce something that, to be sure, was lacking in every way, but at least know that there wouldn't be a surprise waiting on my bank statement next month. So, my inadequate production saw the light of day. For that, I apologize. It should have been silence. During the week, I returned to my shack and had a look at my beacon. As you might recall, I've been using weak signal propagation reports, or WSPR, in my shack for a while. According to the logs, the very first time was in November of 2017. At the end of last year, I took delivery of a Zactec desktop WSPR transmitter, which has been reported on air over 16,000 times since. I've only been using the 10-metre band, and it's been heard as far away from me in Western Australia as the Canary Islands, the home of Johan, Echo Alpha 8, Drogue Delta Foxtrot 4 Uniform Echo, and Peter, Echo Alpha 8, Bravo Foxtrot Kilo, who between them reported my signal nearly 90 times. It's remarkable to note that this is a distance of over 15,000 kilometres on the 10-metre band, using only 200 milliwatts. During the week, I made another milestone, a report in the opposite direction across the Pacific Ocean to mainland USA. While that didn't break any distance records, it was a thrill to see a report from the Maritime Radio Historical Society logging WSPR signals using Kilo Papa Hotel. Other things to note about these reports are that it's been heard across 81 different grid squares by 144 different stations from all directions of the compass. During my hospital stay and since, I've come to appreciate setting little goals, little personal achievements that in and of themselves are not meaningful to anyone but me, and in some cases my medical support team. It reminded me of a time when I attempted to achieve this in amateur radio, making a contact every day. Looking back over my logs, I can tell you that I've not managed to maintain that, though technically, on average, given that I host a weekly net and there's generally more than 7 people who join in, I could claim an average of 1 QSO per day, but both you and I would know that that was stretching the truth somewhat. It occurred to me that my signal report by Kilo Papa Hotel could be considered the beginning of my new 10-metre adventures. Much of my start in this hobby was during the previous solar cycle, and the 10-metre band featured heavily in much of my activities, especially since you can get on that band with the very minimum of antenna. A quarter wave on 10 metres is a 2.5 metre whip, and that can fit even on my car, and it did, for years. When the solar cycle eventually wound its way down, the 10-metre band was quiet for much of the year, with the odd spot to whet your appetite, but rare enough to have little in the way of ongoing contacts. As far as I'm concerned, 10-metre is back in play and is my personal special band, so I'm setting myself a little challenge for the month of November, and you can join in, open to anyone who wants to play. There's no prize, no scoreboard, no accolades, no nothing other than the personal satisfaction of achievement. Here's the challenge. How many kilometres per watt can you achieve during November? To explain, my beacon uses 200 milliwatts, so any distance is multiplied by 5 to get the kilometre per watt number. If you use more than a watt, you'll need to divide your distance by the number of watts you use. As I said, this is a personal challenge. I'm not going to adjudicate, there's no rules to break, no one to tell you that you're cheating. It's just between you and your WSPR beacon. For now, my record is 75,630 kilometers per watt. I'm going to take the opportunity to consider what I might do to improve on that. Perhaps if I reduce power, I'll still be heard in the Canary Islands, but I'll have more bang for my buck. Time will tell. Feel free to share your own achievement, or keep it to yourself, entirely up to you. In case you're wondering about the capacitor thing, a gallbladder is like a bile capacitor. The analogy came from a story I wrote whilst in hospital. It might even see the light of day. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
The third summer camp program for young radio amateurs from the Americas has been scheduled for July 16th through the 21st, 2023 at Carleton University in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. According to the Youth on the Air organization, a team from the Radio Amateurs of Canada will serve as the local host for the camp. The previous two camps were held at the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting in Ohio. Online applications will be accepted starting December 1st from amateurs aged 15 through 25 residing in North, Central, or South America. A maximum of 30 campers will be accepted. Priority will be given to first-time applicants and those living outside the United States. Returning campers will serve as leaders during the camp. The Youth on the Air organization encourages potential campers from outside Canada to start now on the process of obtaining a passport and any visas that may be necessary. More information is available on the Youth on the Air website or from Camp Director Neil Rapp, WB9VPG.
In the state of Michigan, the story of the tragedy is told over and over and is proudly handed down generation to generation. On November 10, 1975, an American freighter, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, was sent to the bottom of Lake Superior. The crew of 29 lost their lives that day. That story will be shared once again between October 30th and November 13th by the members of the Livonia Amateur Radio Club, K8UNS, as they operate a special event station, W8F. On Saturday, November 5th, the operation will also be at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum from 1600 to 2030 UTC. This is also a Parks on the Air activation and an entity in the United States Island Awards scheme. The museum and the Detroit Historical Society are hosting the event, hoping that amateurs from around the world will make a contact and that visitors to the museum will observe via portable ham radio station on its day of operation there. Hams who log W8F as a contact will be issued a confirmation certificate. See the QRZ.com page for Special Event Station W8F for more details.
Here's some additional information on a story we told you about last week regarding Nikola Tesla's original Wardenclyffe laboratory. Designed by the noted architect Stanford White at the turn of the previous century, and a welcoming place today for scientists, historians, and amateur radio operators, the former laboratory of 20th century innovator Nikola Tesla has been chosen to receive a $500,000 grant from the National Park Service and the National Endowment of the Arts. The funds will be used to help pay for restoration of the Long Island, New York property. The grant will allow its transformation into a museum and educational science center, honoring the spirit of Tesla's groundbreaking work. Known as Wardenclyffe Lab, it became the home to many of Tesla's discoveries in radio and other aspects of technology. He had envisioned the Long Island lab as a kind of radio city, with the goal of transmitting electricity and information wirelessly. The site was especially well known for a transmitter tower that was 187 feet high above ground and reached 120 feet below ground level. Unfortunately, that tower is long since gone. This is Tesla's only surviving laboratory, and it is a landmark, having been added to the United States National Historic Register in 2018. Amateur Radio has an active interest in the property as well, and the site recently hosted the 75th anniversary celebration and special events station of the Suffolk County Radio Club.
The chairwoman of the Federal Communications Commission is traveling this week to survey the first-hand recovery efforts associated with both Hurricanes Fiona and Ian. Jessica Rosenworcel will visit Fort Myers, Florida, and communities in Puerto Rico. Rosenworcel will focus her visits on learning from local stakeholders about how Florida and Puerto Rico recovery efforts are progressing. She also seeks to learn what the Commission should consider in the future of natural disaster-related actions. Supporting resilient infrastructure has never been more important, Rosenworcel commented. The FCC is committed to supporting recovery efforts and doing all we can to help restore communications networks as quickly as possible. I look forward to traveling to Florida and Puerto Rico to learn firsthand what worked and what didn't, and where the FCC can do better. In Puerto Rico, Rosenworcel is set to meet with Governor Pedro Pierluzzi, along with others government and industry officials, to assess the status of the recovery efforts. This will include a visit to an emergency operations center.
Amateur Radio Public Service Corps operators from Monroe County, Michigan, participated in several recent exercises in conjunction with the federally mandated biennial preparedness drills at Fermi 2 nuclear power plant in Newport, Michigan. During the exercises at the county EOC, operators from Monroe County activated the radio station in the Emergency Communications Center and made contact with surrounding counties in Michigan, Ohio, and Essex County in Canada in case of evacuations or additional hospital capacity might be needed. Communication was also established with the amateur radio desk WS8 EOC at Michigan State EOC, said County ARRL Emergency Coordinator Lance Charter, KE8BYC. Operators also participated in the radiological decontamination and congregate care shelter exercises for the county. For the RDCC exercises at several local schools, operators set up amateur communication stations to provide a communication link to the county EOC and monitor weather. Just-in-time training was also provided by operators to served agency shelter staff on use of county-supplied LMR radios and proper communications technique. Though amateur radio serves as a backup communications resource for these exercises, County Emergency Management relies on the technical knowledge and skills of local amateur radio public service corps members in many facets of the emergency plan. These drills are not high-activity events for amateur radio, but the skills and knowledge provided by participation are invaluable, said Charter. Monroe County ARPSC is fortunate that the county-served agencies recognize the benefits that amateur radio and its licensees can provide and include us in numerous exercises and planning. For more information, visit the Monroe County, Michigan Amateur Radio website.
The FCC has adopted a new rule requiring owners of out-of-service satellites to remove them from orbit within 5 years, a significant acceleration from the previous rule, which was provided a 25-year deorbiting window. According to the AMSAT news service, the goal is to reduce the risk of collisions in the ever more crowded low Earth orbits inhabited by many communications satellites. The reduction in time was recommended by NASA, which is concerned about the growing amount of space junk in Earth orbit. Again, according to AMSAT News Service, it's estimated that there are already some 100 million pieces of space junk in orbit, much of it too small to track, but not too small to cause significant damage in a collision. The ANS report did not indicate what impact the new rule may have on amateur satellites, some of which have spontaneously reactivated themselves after many years of theoretically being out of service.
You're listening to America's premier amateur radio news magazine of the air. This Week in Amateur Radio.
The Cleveland Amateur Radio Club in Cleveland, Tennessee celebrated their 60th anniversary on August 27, 2022. Founded in 1962, the Cleveland Amateur Radio Club is one of the oldest continually operating clubs in the southeastern United States. The club was officially recognized as an ARRL affiliated club in 1965 and again in 2015 as a contesting club. Currently, the club has more than 125 members and operates its own clubhouse. They have a radio room outfitted with 4 multi-operator HF operating stations under the call sign KA4J, and a separate VHF room serving as the emergency communications room, complete with multiple VHF and UHF operating stations, under the call sign W4GZX. They also have an on-site repeater facility hosting multiple repeaters for VHF and UHF, Digital Smart Technologies for Amateur Radio, or D-STAR, and Digital Mobile Radio, or DMR. 2 off-site mountaintop repeater sites allow for wide area coverage from Atlanta, Georgia to Knoxville, Tennessee. As part of their ongoing celebration, the Cleveland Amateur Radio Club celebrated their anniversary with the Chattanooga Amateur Radio Club at Hamfest Chattanooga 2022 on October 14th and 15th this year. Complete information about the Cleveland Amateur Radio Club can be found at their website www.carc.cc. That's www.carc.cc.
The newest group club on the campus of Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, is a brand new amateur radio club. Sharing the same name as the school's athletes, the Thundering Herd Amateur Radio Club is getting a foothold with a core group of 6 members, including founder Jacob Wrightson, KE8PWC. Jacob is a pre-med student majoring in biology and has been a ham for 2 years. He said that one of the most immediate things on the club's agenda is to help unlicensed members study for the FCC exam and to grow the size of the club. There's a lot of studying to be done and, of course, some paperwork to do so the club can apply for a call sign and establish a shack on campus. Meanwhile, Jacob has been exploring the HF bands and perfecting the art of antenna building. He went on to say that hands-on projects are perhaps his favorite part of the hobby.
On October 7th through the 9th, the Radio Society of Great Britain held its first hybrid convention, which had speakers, attendees, and live stream watchers from across the world. The keynote presentation by International Amateur Radio Union President Tim Elam, VE6SH G4HUA, was very thought-provoking. In it, he highlighted the threats to amateur radio as well as the importance of embracing modern techniques whilst also being willing to adapt and change. The Society has released on its YouTube channel a standalone recording of Tim's presentation combined with his interesting convention chat with the RSGB and IRTS presidents. The RSGB would like to thank everyone who gave a presentation, as well as those who attended the convention, whether in person or online. It is also grateful to RSGB General Manager and Convention Chair Steve Thomas, M1ACB, and his hardworking convention team who made this such a fantastic event. Individual presentations will be released over the coming months, first on the RSGB website for its members, and then on YouTube for everyone to see. The 2 live streams have already had thousands of views. To see either of those or to watch Tim's keynote, go to the RSGB YouTube channel.
And now, with his segment on tower climbing and antenna safety, here is Arizona's own Greg Stoddard, KF9MP.
Over the months, I've received a few requests for this topics. So in answer to these requests, here's Greg's short topics list, volume number 1. First, RF exposure. Depending upon whom you ask, the jury is still out on this topic. There are laws which govern exposure in the workplace which may be located on a tower if you're being paid to climb. Certain lockout devices are required by local, state, or federal law to prevent antennas on a tower from being used while you are climbing. If you are climbing on your own tower or someone else's, there may be antennas on the air while you are climbing near them. You have to make up your own mind regarding what you are willing to risk. If you want my opinion, you should avoid exposure to strong RF fields. I will not climb a commercial tower while any broadcast transmitters are active on them. Paging transmitters can pack a healthy wallop, but often do not run all the time. Since the problem with RF is twofold, both exposure and contact, you should attempt to get all active systems on the tower shut down before climbing. If the tower is very tall and you will be separated vertically by a comfortable distance and not climb past any active antennas, you may choose to leave the stuff on at, say, 400 feet if you're only climbing to 200 feet. In my opinion, this rule does not apply to broadcast transmitters. Contact with the metal antenna transmitting a signal as low as 2 watts can produce an RF burn. I know I've gotten them myself, and much to my surprise. If you have any other health problems, RF exposure may be of special interest to you. One example would be a climber with a cardiac pacemaker. Secondly, sudden weather changes can be an unpleasant event for any climber. This has happened to me a few times, usually in the form of sudden wind changes. In some areas of the world, the weather can change suddenly due to limited visibility and can creep up without any visible signs. In the case of lightning, the answer is simple: get down and get away from the tower as quickly as possible. Depending upon how you were dressed, rain may or may not present a big safety problem. For me personally, rain is more a matter of comfort. But if your gear is not suitable for the rain, when it shows its ugly face, it's time for you to exit the tower site. Rain does make surfaces slick, but the proper gear can minimize the problem. You do not want to let your clothing become drenched while installing a 40-pound antenna at 250 feet, so keep an eye on the forecast before starting any antenna job and bring rain gear if needed. I'd rather climb in the snow than rain. If your clothes become drenched while climbing in the rain, this can add lots of additional weight, which can also jeopardize your safety. Wind is another story. On a guide tower, wind is not as big a problem as on a self-supporting tower. When a freestanding tower sways in the wind, it causes a weird sensation in the climber's head, similar to the feeling of being suddenly lightheaded. Since you are away from all visual cues of movement on a tower, the sway is only felt in the climber's inner ear and in the neck. If you are on a commercial tower, wind may not present an immediate safety problem. This is not the case on a light-duty TV antenna tower in someone's yard. In this case, I always abandon the job and wait for the wind to stop, like maybe that night. On a commercial tower, if you're not moving a long antenna, the wind is more of a hassle than enemy. If you're moving antennas in the wind on a large tower, you'll have to decide for yourself if you can safely handle the antenna. The only way I know to safely exit a tower is to have first installed a rope and anchor and rappel off of it. If you feel you may need a fast way to get down off a tower, installing a rappelling rope is the first task after you get to the work site of the tower. Rappelling is considered to be one of the most dangerous forms of rope work since you are totally dependent upon the rope. Remember, tower work at any height can easily become deadly. Money spent on books, videos, and climbing gear is well worth the investment. This is Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Originating from Albany, New York, and distributed worldwide, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
Carl Kruger, 2E0FEH, takes special pride in the collection of his trophies. The latest conferred upon him is the inscription of his name on the Founders Ball from Worked All Britain for 2021. The award not only recognizes him as a high-scoring chaser for half a decade, but acknowledges the articles he has written for the Worked All Britain magazine and his support and advice given to operators. Chasers face the seemingly daunting task of hunting all kinds of locator squares throughout Britain, starting with the 100-kilometer big squares and then 10-kilometer smaller squares within them. Carl's efforts include helping chasers locate and work portable stations that operate from squares where there are no resident amateurs. There are, of course, other types of ways to earn points with coastal squares, islands, lighthouses, and waterway lights. Carl has been involved in these big and small chases for quite some time. He says that the best bit, after a period of time, is when you start collecting trophies. I have quite a collection now in my cabinet. It's taken a few years to do and a lot of airtime, but trust me, it's worth it, he said. Carl said the award scheme is open to shortwave listeners and even overseas operators who might actually find the collection easier from a QTH outside Britain.
The Hammies Amateur Radio Club, ZS6ZU, is celebrating the latest group of youngsters who've been studying to sit for their Class B exam, the entry-level license, and they've passed. The club, a member of the South African Radio League, as prospective license holders work for volunteer tutors learning theory and completing the hands-on projects. The youngsters are usually between the ages of 9 and 15.
And finally this week, according to printmag.com and the Quarter Century Wireless Association, the legacy of Charles Hellman, W2RP, continues. At the time Charlie became a silent key in 2017, the 106-year-old New York amateur was considered the oldest amateur in the United States and likely the longest licensed. Active almost right up to the year he died, Charlie amassed a collection of QSL cards that so many years later is now carrying a different message to the world, one about graphic design and communication between people. 150 cards in Charlie's collection, which were later purchased by a designer visiting a local antique shop, are now the subject of a soon-to-be-published book on typography and graphics. It is entitled QSL, Do You Confirm Receipt of My Transmission? The collection's owner, Roger Bova, made the cards available to Standard Manual, an independent publisher in Brooklyn, New York, that specializes in books about design history. The book features the simple, bold design of the card from RB0HZ, confirming a 1986 contact on 20-meter sideband. In contrast, there is a whimsical, cartoonish card from DM3EJ for a 1979 sideband contact on 10 meters. The publisher's co-founder, Jesse Reed, told printmag.com in a recent interview that the cards are as much a study in design as in communications in the age before the internet took hold. They are presented in the book in chronological order. Charlie was a retired New York City educator. He will be pleased to know he is still providing a means for people everywhere to expand their knowledge.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
Electron Binders Amateur Radio Club in Tulsa, Oklahoma, airs This Week in Amateur Radio, every week on club-owned KOKTLP 90.9.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.